if the first one did not. So that's really the only thing. But let's jump right into it and see, just how or where we end up towards the end of class. Because today we're covering kingdom fungi. Today we're talking about fungi. Yeah, so let's do it. Let's do it. Okay. Kingdom fungi. So we're going to talk about the basic traits of all fungal organisms and sort of what distinguishes them from other eukaryotes, other eukaryotic organisms with eukaryotic cells. Okay. Okay. So kingdom fungi. Anything that's a fungus, which we'll kind of talk about specifically examples of fungi, they're heterotrophic, as we talked about previously. A heterotroph has to obtain its nutrients by consuming something else, other organisms, plants, animals, whatever it may be. So fungi are heterotrophic. They're actually heterotrophic decomposers. So all are heterotrophic decomposers. Now, what is a decomposer? Really something that's special about kingdom fungi is that they're a little weird because, as you know, we are heterotrophic. You had to eat today, I ate today, to get energy ultimately through the metabolic pathways we've learned. And so we're digesting, we're breaking down fats, proteins, carbohydrates from our diet. We do that internally, right? Weirdly enough, fungi digest externally. So digestive enzymes that come from our pancreas and are secreted into the small intestine to help break down food, we secrete those, right? And it's all happening within us. But fungi actually secrete digestive enzymes outside of their bodies to digest organic matter surrounding them, plants, dead animals, things like that. And so they digest these things and break them down into nutrients, and then they absorb them, weirdly enough. So they're doing their digestion externally and then absorbing those broken down nutrients outside in. Strange. So they're kind of unique in that way. But they are heterotrophic. And the common misconception is that fungi photosynthesize. They do not. They do not. None of them can. They don't have chloroplasts, so they're not photosynthetic. Oh, people in the waiting room. Oh, hey, we went from 14 to 18. Woo! Okay. Now, specifically, fungi and what they are, who they are, what organisms are fungus or fungal. Well, some are multicellular. And these are, well, let me ask you guys, do you know any fungi? What are examples of fungi in the world? Do you know of any examples of fungi? Mushrooms. Randy, are you a fungi? You're a fungi? Nice. I've never heard that joke before. Well, as a biology professor, I've made that joke so many times that I'm just not doing it anymore because I got tired of it myself, but whatever, it's always funny. So mushrooms, absolutely. So mushrooms are multicellular fungi. So let's write mushrooms. There's one more example. You might find these in your damp bathroom. Then you got to call someone. Yeah, mold, totally. Are coral and sponges? Oh, good question. So corals and sponges actually are not. They're actually animals. But interestingly enough, corals and sponges are ancient animals. They've been on this planet for a very long time. And sponges, fun fact, I'll probably mention this next time when we get into animals, but sponges are considered the very first animal ever to exist on the planet. So SpongeBob is an old man. Well, his ancestors are. Are kitchen sponges real sponges? I don't think so. I don't think so. You might have to check me, but I'm pretty sure they're made of cellulose or something, and it's kind of like represents a sponge, or it's similar, but not derived from an actual sponge. Yeah, vegans would, yeah, they might be upset. Absolutely. So let's see. Yes, mold. So mold, that's what we were looking for. So molds are also multicellular fungi. So we'll look at some molds. And then there are some fungi that are actually single-celled. And I bet you've heard of these too. Some are unicellular. Now, a single-celled fungus, it's eukaryotic and it's used to produce alcohol. They do alcohol fermentation. They also help bread rise for making bread and pizzas and whatnot. They'll add these fungi to do this sort of thing, to raise bread. Yeast, exactly, yes. Yeast are single-celled fungi. They have all these characteristics. Okay. So fungi reproduce in a new way. So we've talked about reproduction a bit. Sperm and egg coming together. We've talked about cells dividing by mitosis, asexual reproduction. We're going to introduce a new sort of thing today, which is spores. Spores are used by fungi to reproduce. Spores are kind of interesting. So fungi reproduce by spores. So that's going to be our molds and mushrooms, and we'll talk about these mechanisms in detail. Reproduced by spores. So these are our molds and mushrooms that do that. But the yeast actually don't do that. They do budding. Budding is just a unique, I'll show you what I mean by this. Budding. So yeast are going to do budding, which is just a unique form of mitosis, actually. And so let me actually show you on the slide. Here's our mushroom, and it's releasing spores, right? I just read that they can release up to 1 billion spores every mushroom, so it's pretty crazy. Here's our mold, yum. Here's our yeast cells, and if I show you, you can see my mouse cursor. They're not all the same size, right? They're actually actively dividing, and they're budding off. They're doing asexual budding, where essentially it looks like this. Here, you have your parent cell, and it forms a little bud off of it, which eventually buds off, pinches off the original cell. It'll copy its genetic material, just like in mitosis, and push it into this little bud, which will eventually grow. It's just this unique way of performing cell division. So the yeast will do this budding mechanism. The last characteristic I want to tell you about fungi. We learned way back when, we learned that, well, let me ask you, what types of organisms had cell walls? Their plasma membrane was surrounded by a polysaccharide. Plants, absolutely. Well, fungi also have cell walls. Oh, before yeast? Budding, budding. So they bud off. Yes, so what was the polysaccharide that made that that structural cell wall? What was that called? Yeah, James is on it. Cellulose, exactly. And the fungi also have cell walls, but it's not made of cellulose. It's actually made of a polysaccharide modified with a nitrogen group. You don't have to know that. But they have cell walls made of something called chitin. So cell walls composed, I'm just going to continue over here, of chitin, which is spelled CHITIN. It's this really strong polysaccharide, and they have this nitrogen group attached. So, interesting fun fact, the shells of lobsters and crabs are also made of chitin. Just kind of interesting fun fact. And I think it actually speaks, now that I think about it, it kind of speaks to how animals are more closely related to fungi than they are to plants. Crabs and lobsters, you don't have to know that though. Just, those, I think insects too, their exoskeletons are made of chitin. Again, I'm not an organismal biologist by any means, but I do know that much. So those are basic traits. So today, I thought I turned notifications off. This is super annoying. It's like I turned on do not disturb, and yet I can see my dad texting me. Oh well, whatever. Okay. Blame it on the update. I should. Maybe I will. But you know what's interesting? Finally, my notes synced properly, so I'm happy. I know, Christine, I know. I know, he never made it. I should call him. I should ask him, why didn't you make it? Super annoying, but not really. You want to meet him? No, you don't. Okay. So we're going to talk about the specific ways in which fungi reproduce, namely molds and mushrooms. And it's actually extremely unique and interesting. So let's first look at mold reproduction. And kind of look again at sort of, I think actually maybe I have my time video first, which is cool. Okay, time-lapse vid. So I pulled this up on YouTube. It's really cool. And it demonstrates this process of, and I'm sure you're aware of it, actually, if you've ever had something go bad in your fridge and you see it covered with this fuzzy substance, well, that's a mold. And molds are fungi, and what they're doing is they're actually digesting your food extracellularly, so outside of the cells, and then absorbing the broken down nutrients in order to grow more. And that's why your mold get bigger and bigger. So I'm going to show you a video of this process. It's actually, and it's fast forwarded, it's time lapsed. So check this out. So strawberry going bad. I love the music. Just, you know, it's like elevator music. Very calming. I feel like I'm at a fancy hotel watching this strawberry. Anyways, that's good enough. But you see how it shrinks? Or how it shrunk so much? Isn't that crazy? So that's, the fungus is actually digesting it. It's liquefying the strawberry and absorbing it, and that's how it's growing. So I always like to show that with the leaves. Yeah, it's true. Okay, so what's next? Oh, mold. Let's take a look at how they reproduce with spores. So molds reproduce asexually. Ooh, reproduction. So it's an asexual reproductive process. So they're creating clones of themselves, right? Okay. Couple molds there under the microscope, and I'll show you which ones they are and what their structures, why they look like that in a minute. Let's kind of draw out how these guys reproduce. So it all starts with a spore. A spore is essentially a cell that's coated with a protective thick protein coat. So spores are kind of like seeds, but a little simpler. They don't have nutrients within them. They're sort of just cells that are protected. And so we're starting with a single cell, and we call it a spore. And there's, I hate to break it to you, but because there's fungi everywhere, and each one makes billions of spores, there are spores everywhere. They're so small, and they're everywhere. They're covered in surfaces. They're in the air, the water. Luckily, our immune system just, digests it, eats it up, breaks it down, and it's harmless. But you know, some people are allergic to certain spores, pollens, and stuff. But anyways, let's do an example of how this mold reproduces. First, there has to be a food source, right? There needs to be a source of energy for cell division. Cell division is a very energy requiring process. So I'm going to draw, just pretend this is a piece of bread left out on the table. Here's our bread. Okay. And so spores are floating around, and one lands on the piece of bread. So this is our spore. And just so it's in your notes, spores are in the air and the water. And you know, it's fun to think about it this way. Spores, bacteria, viruses, they're just everywhere. Microscopic, you can't see them. They're just floating and on surfaces. But they're everywhere primarily because, I mean, we learned last time, bacteria, for instance, have been here dividing cell division for billions of years. So of course they're everywhere, right? There's so many. And fungi as well. You know, first fungi were probably around hundreds of millions of years. I don't know the exact date. I'm not the best with dates, but again, that's why I don't teach history. But okay, this spore is going to undergo a process of what we call germination. Like a seed will germinate into a plant. And it's just a fancy word for it's going to grow and divide into branching out structures called hyphae. So let's draw it out. So it's going to divide into these connected cells called hyphae, and they're filamentous cells. So they're forming these like branch-like filaments, kind of like a tree branch of sorts. Let's draw one more there. And those dots would be, those indicate nuclei in our cells. I gotta turn this fucking, oops, excuse me, freaking feature off. I have low battery on my phone, so it keeps dimming. Go to display and brightness. Maybe that'll do it. No, maybe it's like low power mode. Okay. Anyways, okay, so our spore is germinating into the, hey, we're all adults here. Yeah, I make mistakes, I'm human. So this spore is going to germinate into these hyphae cells. And so I'm actually going to draw it branching up. And so this is actually the reason why molds kind of have that fuzzy, cottony appearance, because these hyphae are branching out everywhere, just like a cotton ball. They're coming out everywhere, right? Forming all these branches. So I'm going to label this as hyphae. These branches are called hyphae. They're composed of these filamentous cells. Okay, and then I'm actually going to draw this. Well, what happens at the ends of these hyphae, structures form called sporangia. So I'm going to draw those, and then I'll explain what those do. So they, you know, continue to branch out. Let's do. So branching out like this. And they're going to form these ball structures at the end of these hyphae. And these are called sporangia. And sporangia, right? These are the spore producing structures. So spore producing structures. And so there's going to be a bunch of spores inside. So I'm just going to draw these dots here. And so the reason that this is an asexual reproductive process is because these spores are produced mitotically by mitosis. Spores produced by mitosis. And so to complete this cycle, the sporangia release the spores into the air, or they fall into a water source if the mushroom or the mold is growing near a river, or even just rainfall carries it through the dirt and the wind. And once it lands on a brand new nutrient source, such as a decaying plant or animal or other means of nutrients, it will begin to break it down, digest it, just like we saw with the strawberry, and branch out and form these hyphae. So that's what molds are up to. And fun fact, or kind of just, you know me, always trying to bring back fun concepts from the past. But you need an enzyme for digestion. And what else? Let me ask you, what else is required for digestion besides a digestive enzyme? Let me see if you know. And if you don't, I'll give you a hint. What do we need to digest food? Intestines. So the intestines are more used for the absorption of nutrients. Stomach acid, yeah, that's a good answer. But they don't have acid, do they? They don't really secrete acid. So they're digesting with enzymes outside. So something else is required to break down. I'll give you a hint. These enzymes actually require this to work. We actually learned it like during the first few weeks. Biological molecules, we talked about a specific type of reaction. You guys have great answers. Mechanical, that is it required? I don't know if it's required. I think it helps. But those are great answers. I will admit, those, you know, you're really thinking. Those are all helpful. Let's say that. Not what I'm looking for, but very close. Water. Yeah, remember hydrolysis? So digestive enzymes are actually all hydrolases. They're a class of enzymes that require water. And the way they break apart these macromolecules, remember, is the addition of water was going to split those covalent bonds between monomers. And a hydrogen would go to one and a hydroxyl OH would go to the other. So the reason I bring this up is that's why molds thrive in your shower. It's damp. There's water there. You need water to digest the wood and the paint and whatever else it's breaking down in your shower. So that's and then another example is athlete's foot is caused by a pathogenic mold. So we'll talk about that in a bit. And when does that happen? When sweat builds up in your shoes and it's left there to be damp, the molds can thrive because they can break down their food source. So that's just a fun fact. There's got to be water around. Okay. Next concept. Next, we're going to talk about how. Oh, actually, let me just show you or give you another famous mold. This is because fungi can be very interesting. Just write this really quick. Okay. So this mold up here, you can see all the sporangia at the end of the hyphy under the microscope. This is actually penicillium, the mold responsible for producing penicillin, which is the antibiotic that you may have taken if you had a bad strep throat or a bad infection, but caused by any bacterial species. And so that it's actually derived from mold. Fun fact. Here's just a bread mold, another example of the hyphy structures and the sporangia at the end. So just kind of cool to see. Okay, the next thing we're going to do, we're making a really good time here. Let me see. Let's see here. Wow. Really good time. I think we'll finish early. Cool. Well, first, any questions? Any questions about molds? You have one. Okay. Hit me. Hit me. I'll wait for you to type it. With the enzymes, water. So water is, what is the purpose? I think that the deep, true understanding of just PhD level is kind of a chemistry concept. So I'm not that familiar with it. But what I do know is that these enzymes, in order to break them apart, one big molecule into two, to break that bond, you have to add a hydrogen and add an OH, which they come from water, right? And so the way that enzyme can apply stress to that bond and form a more stable interaction and kind of obey the second law of thermodynamics, water is required. I don't think it can just split. It's just not thermodynamically favorable. This is all conjecture, and it would, a PhD in chemistry would have to fact check me. But what I know at my biology level is that water is necessary to digest, because those atoms are going to be added in order to split the molecule, and it'll become more stable. But I don't go much deeper than that usually, as far as chemistry goes. Okay. Mushrooms. Mushrooms. I love mushrooms. They're really cool. They're so yummy, first of all. Mushrooms. Mushroom reproduction. It is sexual, first of all. Sexual reproduction. Mushroom reproduction. Technically, they can do both, but we're going to focus on the sexual reproductive process. Mushrooms are amazing. I love them on pizza. I love them. What else do I like? I'll have them in an omelet. I'm not really picky with food. I just like everything. But yeah, mushrooms are fungi. And they reproduce in probably the most unique way that we know. One of the most unique ways. They use spores, but I'll show you how they reproduce sexually. And so I'll need 2 markers here, colors. Okay, so I'm going to draw how 2 mushrooms reproduce and form a new mushroom. Now remember, when I say sexual reproduction, what I mean in biological terms is the combining of genetic material from 2 different parent organisms. When you do that, that is sexually reproducing to form a new organism. As we saw before, asexual reproduction, just 1 parent organism, right? You produce an identical clone. Now, we also learned in meiosis, right, chapter that sexual reproduction, this process yields genetically unique offspring, right? This is why you're not identical to your parents, but you have some similarities. So let's take a look at how this is done. We're going to start with spores again, and a spore will be released from mushroom 1. So I'll do it in red there. And mushroom 1's spore, like mold spores, are going to germinate into these hyphy. So this is our hyphy forming. Now, importantly, we saw before that the spores produced by molds were produced by mitosis. Now, if it's produced by mitosis, it means it has all of the genetic material inside that spore from before, right? It's identical. These spores from mushrooms are actually produced by meiosis, meiotically. So meiotic spores. So I'm going to write meiotic spore. And what that means, if these spores are made by meiosis, when we learned about meiosis, we learned that these nuclei are haploid or diploid. Remember, this is sexual reproduction. Meiosis is sexual reproduction. Haploid, you bet. So these are haploid nuclei. These are haploid cells. They have 1 set of chromosomes, right? Not both. That would be diploid. That would be 2 sets. Now we have mushroom 2. And mushroom 2 is doing the same thing. He's like over there in our field of mushrooms example. He's producing spores by meiosis, meiotic spores that germinate outward into hyphae. And the weirdest thing happens when these 2 hyphae meet how did I draw it? It's really cool. So I used a different color here, just black. They fuse through some crazy mechanism. I don't know exactly. I don't think even the textbook says, but I'll have to look. But essentially, these hyphy cells, when they meet, they fuse together to form one cell. So I'm going to draw that. Just one new cell here. And when they fuse together, they have two distinct haploid nuclei inside. Mushrooms are like the only, I'd have to check, but I'm pretty dang sure that mushrooms are the only organisms that do this, where they make these cells with two separate nuclei in them, which will then divide outward and form the entirety of the mushroom. So I'll just draw a few of these cells. I'll draw one more. So all of these cells have two nuclei, two haploid nuclei inside. We call these cells dikaryotic. These are dikaryotic cells. Di for two. So dikaryo for nucleus, two nuclei in one cell, right? Okay. These cells grow outward. So I'm going to say, it's right here. These cells will actually grow to form the entire mushroom. The entire mushroom is made of dikaryotic cells. Once this fusion happens, the mushroom is produced. And the mushroom with the cap and everything, we call it the fruiting body of the mushroom. So the fruiting body. And to complete the reproductive cycle, so this is dividing out and forming our fruiting body. So let's draw our mushroom here. Here's the ground. Here's our mushroom, right? Interestingly, mushrooms have this incredibly extensive branching network of hyphae underneath them. We can't see, but they're massive. I just read that the largest known mycelium, they call it, the largest known branching network of hyphae is mycelium. I think it was like 1,000 football fields long from one mushroom. Crazy. But what was I going to say? It forms this fruiting body, right? So this is the fruiting body. And to complete our cycle here, this mushroom is going to perform meiosis underneath it to form new spores. So actually, since it's a brand new, I'll use green. So new spores kind of fall off of it underneath the mushroom. And I can kind of show you where that happens. Where the spore producing structure is, that's going to do meiosis to produce new spores. Okay, so check it out. So this is under the microscope just to show you spores and the hyphae of this mushroom. But I have a picture of underneath the mushroom because that's where the spores are produced. The little ridges here, they're called gills, like of a fish. That's where the gills produce the spores. This is a close-up of on the gills there. And it releases spores underneath. But yeah, it's a very unique, interesting mechanism of forming these. I never knew that when I eat my mushroom, it's made of cells with 2 nuclei in them that never fuse together. So it's kind of weird, kind of interesting. Because of course, when sperm and egg, haploid sperm cells and egg cells come together, the nuclei fuse immediately, right? But for some reason, these ones stay apart. Any questions? Why don't they fuse? Oh, Randy, you got me. I actually have no idea. I don't even know if anyone knows. It's a great question. Why don't the nuclei fuse? I don't know. Maybe they just evolved like that. They were able to divide without having to fuse. But I will tell you, if you're interested, they do fuse at some point. The only where they're fusing is at the gills. They have to fuse in order to do meiosis, so they'll do that there, right? Because meiosis, you need both sets of genetic information to do that process. So they fuse there and then, but nowhere else. Only when meiosis is triggered. It's really, it's a good idea for a PhD project. Someone should look into that. Okay. Oh. No way. Oh, interesting. People are trying to figure it out already. Look at that. Cool. Well, maybe we'll get there. Nice. You like fungi. Cool. Yeah, I like this unit. It's different. All right. So the last thing I want to talk about, and then we'll kind of just do a fun group activity of sorts and class earlier, is the fungi that cause disease. There's a few. I'll just mention a couple famous ones. It's kind of a nasty picture. Okay. Pathogenic fungi. Pathogenic, meaning disease-causing fungal organisms. Pathogenic fungi. So pathogenic means it causes disease, disease-causing. And really, there aren't many mushrooms that cause disease that I know of. But there are certainly molds. There are certainly yeast infections and yeasts that can cause disease. So let's start with athlete's foot, sort of a famous one. So athlete's foot. This is the growth of mold on skin and nails. Usually from damp gym equipment. So that's the picture in the top right. Oh, you read about ants into zombies? Yeah, fungi are really interesting. They can do that. Yeah, there's fungi that will change the behavior of animals. Again, I'm no organismal biologist, so I don't know exact names, but that's certainly a characteristic of some fungi. And I know there's one that causes it in snails too. It causes snails, it's crazy, to like fall and try to commit or to get eaten. To go out in the open and get eaten so that the fungus can continue its life cycle, things like that. It's crazy. It's evolution for you. Selecting for whatever increases your chances. Selecting for a trait that increases your ability to reproduce, right? Yeah, so Randy, I'm actually going to mention that. Well, I'm going to mention this kind of cool thing. It's a plant fungus, a pathogen to plants. So I'll do it in green, why not? There's a plant pathogen called Ergot, and it infects rye wheat. So Ergot is the name. So it grows, so ergot fungus grows on rye plant. And the reason it's an interesting fungus is because it's actually the natural source of LSD. And during the Salem witch trials, they believe now that they were hallucinating because they were consuming infected rye plants. And it was causing them to see visions and stuff. So that's yeah. Isn't that crazy? That's what the people think now. I don't know if it's been conclusive, but it's a hypothesis. And the last example is a yeast example. There's a few infections caused by yeasts, but the one I have on the slide is a yeast infection of the mouth. It's called oral thrush. So oral thrush is a yeast infection of the mouth. So it's really you know, every kingdom, every group of organisms, there's always the bad ones and the good ones. Interestingly enough, there's always the poisonous, deadly plants, and then the healthy plants. There's the, you know, the cuddly dogs, but deadly animals that'll kill you. Bacteria, there's 90% of bacteria are actually healthy for you. 10% cause disease, like, you know, tuberculosis and E. coli and things like that. And then fungi, the same way. There's healthy fungi that are harmless and even beneficial, maybe. Like we get penicillin from molds. We get beer from yeast, so that's huge, and wine. But yeah, everything. It's very interesting how there's always the ones that are with us and the ones that are against us. Okay, what time is it? Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do today is show you. I'm like debating. Nah, I'll end class early. It's the holidays and, you know, COVID, so it's cool. But but let's do this assignment together and then go over it, and then we'll call it a day. So it's let me pull it up. Oh, here's the pictures of kind of nasty. I should pick less nasty pictures next time. Here's the ergot on the rye plant. Yeah, thrush, athlete's foot. Oh, what happened? Oh, that was it? Where's my activity? Well, gotta improvise then. And I gotta fix my slides, so let me write that. Fix slides, add activity. Why don't I just read it out? Because I have the answers written. Oh, gosh. Oh, well. So I'll just kind of do a fun quiz and have you guys answer in the chat. So endosymbiotic theory. So this is going over last lecture too. Endosymbiotic theory describes the origin of two eukaryotic organelles. What are they? What two organelles? Okay. Yep, that's right. Mitochondria and the chloroplast. Absolutely. Perfect. So those were once bacteria, right? The first eukaryotic cells to evolve are classified in kingdom what? What group of organisms were the first eukaryotes? Our ancient ancestors. Yeah, the protists, kingdom Protista, or protists, absolutely. Nice. And okay. Yeast reproduce by what mechanism, while mushrooms and molds reproduce by using what? Yeah, or maybe I should rephrase it, like, what's the difference between yeast reproduction and what do mushrooms and molds use to reproduce? Mushrooms are sexual reproduction, absolutely. So it's kind of a tricky answer. But essentially, I was just looking for spores, that mushrooms and molds use spores, and then yeasts reproduce asexually through budding. Their cells bud off to form a new cell. Okay, two more. What group of organisms are classified, or just name an example. Name an example of a unicellular photoautotrophic plant-like protist. Unicellular, if you remember from last time. Cyanobacteria. So cyanobacteria are bacteria. Protozoa, those are the animal-like protists. So the cyanobacteria are prokaryotic. So we're talking about domain eukaryotic. And we're talking about cells that engulfed cyanobacteria, made of chloroplasts, right? And became the plant-like protists. So what was a single-celled eukaryotic photosynthetic protist? I'll give you a hint. They light up sometimes. They luminesce, bioluminescence. Plankton, yes. Phytoplankton. Technical term is dinoflagellates. Diatoms, these are different types of single-celled eukaryotes, protists, the plant-like protists. They're single-celled and they photosynthesize. Yeah. Okay, sweet. Last question. Mushrooms reproduce sexually when two genetically unique haploid hyphy cells fuse to form cells with two nuclei called what? What are the names? What is the name of this type of cell with two distinct nuclei? Dikaryotic. Nice. Okay. If I let you guys go early, will you not tell anyone? But that's all I had for today. Just wanted to talk about fungi and end early for the holidays and stuff. Joey, you're funny. All right, guys. Well, that's it. So no announcements. I'll see you on Monday for plants and animals. When is our final lab? I think next week. I think next week's the last one. The plant one, yeah. And we do plants and animals on Monday. All right. Getting close to the end, everyone. So good job. Have a great Thanksgiving. Eat a lot. Enjoy. And I'll see you next week.